So here we are, it's Grenfell Speaks, talking to Tom Woolley, and we are going to be talking today about Grenfell Tower's cladding and gain some of your insight and expertise on the materials used and maybe your opinions on, decisions that were made or the methodology behind what's occurred. So I'd just like to say thank you for coming and joining us. I think we'll just get straight into it.
Perhaps I should explain a bit about who I am myself.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
So I was Professor of Architecture at Queen's University in Belfast for about 17 years, but then I took early retirement and I was working for a number of years at the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales. And much of my work has been about developing alternative, natural, non-hazardous building materials. So we specialised in development of sheep wool, wood fibre, hempcrete, and a number of installations like that, which we think are what people should be using in buildings. I was particularly keen to come here to Grenfell because I spent a lot of time following the inquest at Lakanal House.
In 2009.
I tried to contact both Harriet Harman MP and some of the lawyers there, because I could see from what was going on at the inquest that they weren't getting it right. They hadn't actually spotted what had happened. And I felt that the outcome of Lakanal House was completely muddled, and they didn't learn the lessons that they should have learned. If they'd learned those lessons at the time, it's got nothing to do with sprinkler systems. This is to do with the cladding panels that we used on that building. So I don't want to see the same thing happening again. I've already seen lots of signs of people modelling and obfuscating and covering up, start of a cover-up, distracting attention from what really happened. You can see that whole process. And I'm also concerned that most of the so-called experts that have been brought in, particularly the expert panel, have such major conflicts of interest that that their work is almost worthless. So I'm sure they will publish some stuff that we can make use of. So it's incredibly important that the residents of Grenfell get proper independent advice from people that really understand what's happened.
And that's brilliant, because that's exactly why we wanted to get you involved. We do feel as a community that all of the experts that are speaking are being commissioned by the authorities that the community is trying to get answers from. And as you say, that presents a huge conflict of interest in terms of the people that we feel need to have the information. Another thing that's also been cited is obviously the fact that the cladding had such an instrumental part in the spread of the fire and the downfall of the building as a whole. So one of the things, or a couple of the questions we want to ask you, is about the cladding and your knowledge and expertise on that, and maybe get some insight into either the methodologies that other building contractors or companies may have used as justification for the choices they made.
Yeah, but the issue here is actually a very simple one. Plastic foam insulations are dangerous and flammable, all of them. There's a lot being made of how some are safer than others. It's nonsense. They are all flammable, they are all dangerous, and they shouldn't be used on buildings. That sounds like quite an extreme statement, but we've been raising these issues for 20 years, from when we published the Green Building Handbook. And we had government funding back in the 1990s to do that. In fact, it started in the 80s, and the money was withdrawn by the government under pressure from the British Plastics Federation. So we've been fighting against the use of these materials for a long time now. And plastic foam insulations are dangerous. They are flammable, they contain toxic chemicals. The toxic chemicals themselves emit when they're just sitting in the building, not when they're on fire, but they actually affect people's health, because they contain chemicals which are known as endocrine disruptors. Endocrine disruptors are of great concern to the World Health Organization, because the endocrine disruptor chemicals attack the thyroid gland and affect the development of babies. It's even been associated with developmental problems in children. So we should be working to get rid of these materials out of buildings, all buildings, not just in tower blocks and not just above 18 metres, but all buildings, whether they're low-rise houses. They're now retrofitting hundreds of houses in the name of dealing with fuel poverty, where they're putting this PIR, polyisocyanurate insulation, onto the walls on the inside of people's houses, and people are being affected by the chemicals in these materials, and also at risk from fire. So this is not just a problem of tower blocks. These materials shouldn't be used in any buildings, in my view. And when I said that 20 years ago, people would say, well, what else can you use? These are great materials, they insulate buildings, make everybody warmer. Now, we've got lots and lots of really good alternative materials which are non-toxic, non-flammable, non-hazardous. So why don't we use those instead?
Okay, so you said there that all of these panel types are flammable.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between them if they are all flammable? Do they just burn at different rates of speed? Do they give off different gases? I mean, what is the reasoning behind choosing any of these panels as opposed to the substances that you say are safe?
Okay, well, first of all, you've got two things going on here. One is composite panels,
yeah,
which have aluminium or other materials. At Lacanau House, for instance, they had a sort of fibre composite cladding material on it. Then the panels contain this plastic insulation. So the external panels, as far as I understand it, on Grenfell, were actually very thin aluminium cladding with a polyester insulation in it. And I've seen lots of pictures of these panels. To be quite honest, we've never seen that used before in the UK. It's not a common material. It's manufactured in France, I believe, or it's even an American product. I'm not sure of the history of where it's come from. Polyester undoubtedly burns and is hazardous. These very thin sheets of aluminium aren't going to stand up very long in a fire. But then behind that were PIR insulation sheets that were stuck to the walls.
The external of the building, yes.
And these are being used all over the UK now to renovate and retrofit all sorts of buildings. And then they get in some cases they plaster over it with sort of cement type plasters rather than using aluminium panels. But all those materials are also flammable. Now, some are slightly less flammable than others, but to be quite honest, you're talking about a matter of minutes here. So if you test these plastic foam insulations, you will find that they all burn.
Right.
Some perhaps burn slightly quicker than others. They also give off toxic gases such as cyanide and other chemicals, the names of which are so complicated that I can't always remember them because I'm an architect, I'm not a chemist. But they are, they're pretty scary. And most disturbing is the fact that the flame retardant chemicals which they use to try and reduce fire in these buildings is actually one of the most toxic and hazardous substances they can use.
Okay.
And in the United States, a section of the building regulation community are actually campaigning to have flame retardants taken out of materials. Now, these flame retardants are also used in furnishings, they're used on computers, they're used in all sorts of things in our everyday life. So they're prevalent in the environment, but they're very toxic and very dangerous. The other thing which I'm interested to find out about the building here is that I've seen some photographs of interior shots, and on the walls there are plaster dabs. If you look at those pictures, you'll see there's little sort of round blobs.
And what are those?
Plaster dabs are used to stick internal plasterboard to the walls.
Okay.
So these walls must have been dry lined. So I want to know whether they were dry lined with an insulated plasterboard or just with ordinary gypsum board. The boards have completely disintegrated as far as one can see.
Yes.
So there may even be a problem with fire from materials that were in the apartments, not just on cladding on the outside.
So it looks like, in all likelihood, on the external of the building, we've got unsuitable materials, and on the inside of the building, we've got unsuitable materials.
I mean, the critical thing, and again, I'm not a fire expert here, but so many people have talked about this, and we've all seen what happens. that this material burns so quickly that it's shot up the building at such an incredibly high rate, and the regulations require what's called fire stopping, which in my view is, well, I hate to say it's a joke, but it's actually
not fit for purpose.
It's not fit for purpose, and there are kinds of fire stopping using a non-flammable insulation material, but honestly that would break down very quickly when you've got a
building of
configuration like that.
Such that size.
Just wouldn't make much difference, and so that's another issue really in terms of how the building was detailed. So
can I ask a little bit about the building safety regulations then? We've got the British Standard Tests, BS 8414, which talks about cladding and its potential for fire to spread on an external or internal of a building, and its potential to re-enter a building from the outside. Now, it's been said that the cladding that was used on this building, and certainly the other types of cladding, is not suitable for buildings over 10 metres of height. Grenfell Tower is 67 metres in height. So why would they choose something that's considered unsuitable and indeed banned in countries such as Dubai and Australia, and I believe France also, in the UK? Why would they have not changed the laws to factor this in and make it illegal?
Well, first of all, there have been cladding fires in Dubai, several. In fact, I've been showing pictures of them in lectures I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years. So I'm not sure what the regulations are. No one's been killed in those fires as far as I know.
Right.
But they've still had fires that have gone right up the outside of the building with cladding, including one that's right next to that, the highest building in the world, or whatever.
Yes, that was a few years ago, wasn't it? So
there's a hotel and apartment building, so they have had fires. They may have changed their regulations as a result of those fires as well. But within the UK, DEFRA have actually just issued a set of guidance. I don't know if you've seen the document, which has been circulated to local authorities about what they're supposed to do if they're going to reclad buildings.
Right.
And they're saying that, for instance, where you've taken cladding off, you've got to put something back straight away, because that's making the buildings even more dangerous.
Right.
And in that document, to my amazement, they set out at great length the procedure for desktop approvals. And this is the biggest problem, is that so much of what's going into buildings now is based on so-called desktop approvals.
Okay, can you just explain what desktop approvals are? So is that kind of almost a lab testing environment? There's no real world scenarios? Is it something along those lines?
No, what happens is that somebody somewhere has done an actual fire test on a building, and everybody else then doesn't bother to do fire tests anymore.
Right.
They just cite a piece of literature, and they just get some documents and pieces of paper out, and they say, oh, this looks like it's okay.
So it's all based off one initial test, and nobody ever does any subsequent tests.
Yes. I mean, if Grenfell does nothing else, it should lead to the virtual scrapping of the current regulatory and approval regime, in my view. We have to go right back to square one and start again and come up with something which is fit for purpose. I was, for a short while, chairman of the Building Regulations Advisory Committee in Northern Ireland, called NIBRAC, and I resigned because I was concerned about undue influence by insulation company who had a representative on the committee.
Oh, right.
And my view was that they shouldn't, somebody with a vested interest like that shouldn't. And as part of that process, we had an almighty row about the way in which things were approved and so on. Now, I'm following up on that at the moment in Northern Ireland, because I've done a Freedom of Information request asking them what they're doing about it. And I got a phone call the other day from the civil servant who's dealing with my Freedom of Information request to apologise for the fact that he's missed the deadline. So I forget how many days they've got.
42 days, if I'm not mistaken, 6 weeks.
No, it's shorter than, I think it's less than that, but I might be wrong. No, because it must be less, because I did those FOIs the day after the disaster here.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, they've apologised. The response which he has written has gone to the Cabinet Office for approval. So he's not allowed to write to me and answer my questions.
Without getting...
And I said, well, what do you mean cabinet? I don't think there is a cabinet office in Northern Ireland. Oh no, it's going to the cabinet office in the UK, as far as I understand it. So I still don't have the response, and that just indicates how worried they are, because I'm asking very major questions about what are they going to do in the future. Now coming back to the British Standard, the problem with the British Standards is that British Standards are dependent on other people paying for the work that's done. Okay. So, for instance, we approached the British Standards Institute a couple of years ago about how could we get a British standard for natural insulation materials, because they're much better than these plastic foam things. And they said, well, you will have to do all the work. In other words, they don't do the work. It's not. They don't appear to be doing it. They will check our work, and they wanted us to pay £30,000 for starters to get that process started.
Wow.
So it's only the big commercial companies that can afford to pay for these. The British Standards Committees and the European Standards Committees, and there's a whole range of committees and bodies. These bodies are full of people with commercial vested interests. Independent experts like me cannot afford to go to all these meetings, and no one will fund me to do that work.
To do that research.
So none of this work, none of these standards, as far as I'm concerned, are properly independent. They're not. They are as a result of people cobbling together things over a period of time. Now, some of the scientists involved in British Standards Institute and other bodies might be quite cross with me for saying that, because they themselves are very genuine, decent people. They're not unethical, but they're operating within a commercial context which they can't escape from. And one of the things that I did some research on is there's a body called the Energy Saving Trust. Have you heard of them?
I haven't.
The Energy Saving Trust are funded by the government to provide so-called independent and impartial advice to the public about which insulation materials to use.
Okay.
So if you go onto their website, you will find lots of synthetic foam insulation products endorsed by the Energy Saving Trust.
Right.
And in order for them to get on their website, they have to pay £1,500 for the privilege of doing that.
Wow.
So I wrote to the Energy Saving Trust and said, what are you going to do post Grenfell? Will you put something on your website warning people of the dangers of synthetic foam insulations? And they wrote back to me and said, well, they didn't actually say no, they just said, well, it's not an issue for us. All the products which we put on our website have what are called Agrimont certificates.
And what are those?
That's another body. So you've got the BBA, the British Board of Agrimont. British Board of Agrimont provides certificates for all these products and materials. And for a local authority, normally will not allow a material to be used in one of their projects unless it's got a BBA certificate.
And are they a commercial entity as well?
Yes, they are. They used to be part of the Building Research Establishment. They're based in the same campus of buildings, but they're theoretically independent. So if I developed an insulation material, I would go along to the British Board of Agrimont, say, here's all my work that I've done on developing the material, and here's a nice fat cheque for £30,000. Will you give me a certificate? So the Energy Saving Trust say that all these insulation materials are safe because they have BBA certificates. They didn't actually say they were safe, they implied they were safe.
Yes.
So I thought, okay, let's have a look at the BBA certificate. Click on one of the ones, download the BBA certificate. It says this product meets Class F of BS
8414?
No, it's 15030.
And what does that deal with?
And it's also European standard. So I thought, Class F, that's really, I don't remember hearing of that before. Class F, when you look it up, says nothing is known about its fire performance. It's not been tested, nobody knows anything about it. And so I went through one after another. One or two of the products they had on their website said it was it met Class D or C or something, which is a sort of spread of flame criteria, but many of them said Class F.
Wow.
So that means it actually there's no work being done on its fire safety. But that's allowed under the British standard, or is a British standard, which is allowed to be used in BBA certificates, and most people don't read the small print. You see, I'm one of these weird people that actually sits down and reads the small print and tries to find out what these things are. I'm sure most people don't. It's got a BBA certificate, must be
so
all
it
right.
should be suitable.
And so you know that's just one example of dozens of the way in which the whole regulatory system is just not fit for purpose, in my view.
Okay, so we've got corporations who are verifying other corporations who all have a monetary interest, creating or shaping laws or regulations that involve the direct safety of inhabitants and residents. What needs to, or what is it in your view needs to change in order to actually make it a truly independent or a system which truly has the benefits of or the best interests of residents and the people who are going to be subject to these at heart?
Well, I think that the first thing we've got to do is find some way of stopping the corporate lobbying that goes on, which affects all these regulations and standards. To give you another example of how this corporate lobbying works, there's an all-party parliamentary group in Parliament.
Yes.
There's hundreds and hundreds of
them.
APPGs.
Yeah.
And pretty well anyone can set one up as long as you can find some MPs to sign up to it.
Okay.
So there's an APPG on healthy homes and buildings, which has had several meetings and is chaired rather coincidentally by my local MP, Jim Shannon, who's a member of the Democratic Unionist Party. We could talk about that in a minute.
I know the story for another day.
So guess who sponsors the APPG on healthy homes and buildings? Saint-Gobain, manufacturers of Celotex.
Okay.
So they and that's just one tiny example of the kind of corporate lobbying that goes on, because Saint-Gobain are very much promoting themselves as a manufacturer of healthy materials and supporting the idea of healthy buildings. So they amazingly, I'm still on their mailing list. After this, if this goes public, they certainly will take me off.
I'll probably take you off it then.
But I mean, to me, that's just. I don't think that that's acceptable. You see, I don't think. Of course, the people running it are saying, well, can you come up with another sponsor? But I really don't know anybody who's got the money to put into something like that. But I mean, it just seems to me that that's not right. The technical director of Saint-Gobain, Mark Allen, is on the Building Regulations Advisory Committee. Now, I don't think people like that should be on those committees. They should be independent. But a friend of mine the other day who's involved in construction things, it's actually quite difficult to find people who are really independent, because everybody's got
a vested interest and involved in various organisations.
I think the other big problem with this is I think the naivety of architects. Architects specify materials, and they tend to believe all the stuff that they're told.
Okay.
A representative will come into the architect's office, put on a big show. They're called CPD workshops. Provide a free lunch, and tell the architects how wonderful their products are, and they'll throw all these different certificates at them. You've not just got BBA certificates, you've got British standards, as you mentioned. You've got what's called LABC, Local Authority Building Control.
Yep.
There are LABC certificates as well, and they all tend to follow the same track, and they are not, in my view, not robust enough really to ensure that things are safe for people. And what's even more annoying is that there's even a propaganda campaign against the kind of materials that we would use as alternatives.
Okay.
So, for instance, yet another body involved in this is the NHBC.
Yep. Who are they?
National House Building Council. They're like an insurance company. In fact, LABC is a bit of an insurance company. They certify house developments all over the country, and I was quite surprised to find lots of tower blocks as well. So NHBC, one of the biggest players in the market, and a few years ago, the NHBC published a report actually saying that the sort of alternative bio-based materials that we advocate are not suitable, and that was picked up by the construction press. So they're even actively propagandizing against materials which we think are what should be being used in buildings.
Okay, so if there are materials that you think should be used in buildings, and there are clearly cladding systems which shouldn't be used in buildings because of their poor fire resistance or the fact they give off chemicals that are harmful to health, is there a huge cost difference between these materials? What do you think their motivation is behind it? Is it literally just monetary in terms of them being able to win investment or gain government contracts? What's your view on that?
Well, there used to be a big difference. For instance, we use a lot of wood fibre insulation.
Okay.
Wood fibre insulation is made from pressed wood waste and some new wood as well. And they compress it with water, and they use the natural lignin to glue it together. So there's no toxic chemicals going into it. There are some companies that add a very small and supposedly safe flame retardant to their wood fibre. So that wood fibre insulation is coming from Switzerland and Austria and Germany. It's actually very cheap to make, but because we're having to import it from there, and because it's not subsidised, and that's another issue, the foam insulation products are subsidised. The natural insulation products are not. So that those products are more expensive. However, PIR, for instance, which was on the building here, polyisocyanurate, that is made using a very nasty chemical called MDI, methyl diisocyanate.
Okay.
MDI is now in short supply. We're not entirely sure what's going on, but about 6 months ago, Kingspan issued a warning to their customers saying, we're running out of these materials, sorry, we can't source the chemicals that we need. So I started to do a bit of research on that, and it seems as though the main factory producing MDI is near Tarragona in Spain, and has been polluting the river there for years. Serious, really bad pollution problems. And the Spanish government have at long last said, right, no more. So there's suddenly this big shortage of MDI, and so the price of these plastic foam installations has shot up. They're already asking for 30% more than they were 6 months ago, and it's likely to go up even more.
But that would still be cheaper than the safer materials.
No, it means that the safer materials are now starting to become...
So it might become a more practical choice now.
If wood fibre insulation, for example, was produced in the UK, which it could easily be produced, we've got plenty of the raw materials, there are even factories that wouldn't have to change their production that much to make it. It would be really cheap, it would be much cheaper. But you see, Kingspan, for instance, who make foam insulation, they got a multi-million-pound soft loan from the Green Investment Bank, their factory.
Okay.
You know, these companies get hidden subsidies in many ways, and they're also they're not paying enough for all these dangerous chemicals and the petrochemicals which they're using. So in my view, the foam insulations are subsidised, whereas the natural insulations are not. Now, the other insulation that we've developed is called hempcrete. Now, it's not always a suitable material to use, for instance, say on a tablet, because it's a wet system, so you actually have to cast it in place.
Okay.
But it's been used on multi-storey buildings. Bradford University has a 8-storey building, and all the insulation is hempcrete. And that is made from hemp, which is grown in fields in the UK, and we mix it with lime, and it creates this absolutely fantastic insulation material. It's completely fireproof. You cannot set fire to it. You know, even if you doused it in petrol, you can't set fire to it. And it's natural. It's bio-based. It's a renewable, crop-based material. You know, so it's those sorts of materials should be being promoted. Now, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, the Labour government actually set up a programme to promote bio-based materials, and the ministry, DEC, was the ministry which was actually provided some funding to kickstart the programme. It was the first thing the Tories got rid of when they came. They'd hardly been in power for more than a few weeks when they got rid of the whole section that was set up within DEC to promote natural installations. So, and that is a classic example of the influence of corporate lobbying from these big businesses.
So based on what you've said, just to recap, it seems like there's a whole web and infrastructure of companies and large corporations who are effectively verifying each other and signing each other off as providing good and safe materials, which would kind of suggest that the landlord, as it were, or the project manager of a building like this may not have any knowledge at all of the materials being chosen or supplied, or the materials that they did end up choosing were no better than the ones that they could have chosen, which has been suggested in the past. We actually have some of the cladding material here which we want to bring your attention to. I don't know if you've seen any of this before, but yeah, just be interesting to get some of your thoughts on this material, about whether it's safe or whether it poses any danger. I mean, this is readily available all over the estate. This is actually still falling off the building now, landing in people's gardens. I mean, I've just touched it now. I mean, I'm not too worried about it myself, but people think if they do touch it, or children touch it, are they putting immediate risk, the health at immediate risk of their...
Yes, they are. This is dangerous. So you should be wearing gloves when you do this.
I will wash my hands afterwards and stop rubbing it on my clothes.
Yeah, because this is what is called fire debris or fire residue, and I had a meeting on Friday with a guy, and he's actually working on a project where they're actually doing testing of this, and they're analysing what toxic chemicals are retained within. I understand that the people I know at University of Central Lancashire have been working on a project for a while now with the fire brigades to look at toxic residue after fires. Because what happens when the firefighters have been in a fire is that they go back to the fire station. The protective clothing they've been wearing is just hung up. Now, my understanding is that after a period of time, that it goes off to be cleaned, but it's not cleaned immediately, and that is contaminated with toxic residue. Even the pump, the pumps, the fire engines, all the gear is contaminated with toxic residue, and there is a great concern about health risks from this material. And this is stuff that you can't even see. These are big lumps of it like this. And the chemicals which are contained within these sorts of materials are potentially carcinogenic, and if it's falling off the building, and it's quite lightweight, so it'd be floating around, so it may travel some distance.
Yes, it was said that when the building fire actually took place, the debris that actually came off the building whilst the fire was going was found in places as far as 3 miles away. So yeah, it really did cover a lot of ground, but I think it is a huge worry, because in terms of the area that we're in, we've got an estate with 800 other houses in immediate proximity. We've got thousands more houses in the nearby area, and as I say, I mean, in a radius of 3 miles, although it is suggested that most of it went to the northwest, that people are coming into contact with this and have been constantly.
You see, one of the things that concerns me is that there's a lot of discussion about what caused the fire, whether this cladding panel was fit for purpose, whether another one, if it had been used, was better. In my view, it doesn't matter whether, if it's plastic foam insulation, it's not suitable, even if it's 2 meters off the ground, never mind at the top of the building. But then the issue is, okay, so we've used the wrong material, so there's a fire. The point is that this stuff is in the environment, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And not just from this fire, but in all sorts of other situations.
Okay.
And these are hazardous materials made from chemicals, which are affecting the environment and affecting people's health. So But I mean, what we need to do with this stuff is to get it properly analysed. I mean, one of the first things you can see about this is that there's fibres in it.
Yes.
So one of the differences between some of the plastic foam installations is that they actually have a fiberglass mesh,
which holds it together.
Holds it together, yes. Though there are products made with foam installations. I mean, Kingspan, for instance, promote their foam installations as not having fibre in them. So this is almost certainly the Celotex product because it's got these little microscopic. In my view, these fibres are also dangerous, and there's a big debate about whether fiberglass insulation itself is dangerous or not. It was classified by the International Agency on carcinogens as being carcinogenic, and there was a huge backlash by the fiberglass industry in America, and they got it taken off the carcinogenic list. So it's still a worry. But the other thing is that the companies making these products are changing the chemical formulations all the time.
Right.
So you don't know what's in them. So they've recently moved from what were called brominated fire retardants to phosphoric fire retardants.
And what's the difference?
Well, they're using an ammonium phosphate, which is almost the same as the stuff that farmers put on fields as a fertilizer, and this is partly responsible for the charring that you can see on here. As far as I know, I'm straying slightly out of my area of expertise here because I'm basing this on what I've been told and what I've read, because I'm not a fire expert. But another thing which is totally wrong and bad is that there are also things called health and safety data sheets, which every building material is required to publish a data sheet.
Okay.
Now, I'm actually still trying to find out who's responsible for this. I'm not clear whether it's the health and safety executive or who, but it's standard practice that everybody publishes a health and safety data sheet. So if we had one in front of us here, and I can show you them, when you get to the bit on ecological information, health information, effects on the environment, toxicity, what does it say? Nothing known, nothing known, nothing known, nothing known, nothing known. All the data sheets which are being published now are disguising or hiding the information about the toxicology of the materials they're producing. Again, that has to change completely. We need to stop that happening. Health and safety data sheets for building products must have full declaration. They're hiding behind the European thing called the REACH directive. The REACH directive allows a company to register the chemical formulation under the REACH directive, and once they've done that, that seems to let them off the hook.
So that almost suggests that as long as they have done that, they've almost done their due diligence, and it lets them off the hook, as it were.
Yeah, and again, you see, architects are very naive. Oh, it's got a data sheet, fine. They don't bother to read down it and see it actually tells them nothing about the product.
So it seems that we've got a large number of entities and industries who are all somewhat at fault for something like Grenfell Tower being cladded in the materials that were chosen.
That's the problem. It's so many individual things, and it all adds up to a complete lack of safety. That's the problem. And so everybody says, well, it's not me, we just specify something, it says it's safe in the certificate. It's not my fault. And then the person who does the certificate say, oh, well, it's not my fault because it was somebody else who did this, and then it complies with BS this or something else. And as soon as you probe all of these different things, you find you're just punching a balloon. There's nothing there. It's air.
So obviously we had the Lakanal fire in 2009, it's 2017, the government sat on a report about the recommendations from Lakanal House. We've got Grenfell Tower now. It's been said that there will never be another Grenfell Tower because laws and regulations will change. Do you think that this will now make the industries and the authorities and government actually put a stop to these kind of panels and these kind of materials being used?
Well, the cynical me says no, it won't. I'm very, very concerned that the whole thing will get sort of brushed under the carpet, and a couple of years will go by and it won't really have changed anything. And they'll say, oh well, no, if we use this material, it's fire safe, and if we use that, I mean, that's my biggest concern. We need an absolute root and branch reform. We need to scrap the whole current system. I mean, if you look at who's on the Building Regulations Advisory Committee for England, and Wales is covered by it as well, it's nearly all industry insiders. There's hardly anybody on that committee that is at all independent or is going to ask any awkward questions. So we should get rid of them. They should be all sacked tomorrow. We should start all over again and get a completely different group of people involved, who are going to ask the right sorts of questions. And we have some of the best experts in the world in the UK. I mean, there was a big conference on fire retardants in Manchester recently, but a lot of these people are scared to come out and say anything because they're worried about their jobs. Universities are not really independent. Building research establishment isn't independent. It's a commercial organisation. It relies on money it gets from materials. So, we have the whole edifice, in a sense, should really be crumbling. But is it?
Yes. So I think that's the importance of things like Grenfell Speaks, of Justice for Grenfell, of Grenfell United. I mean, we've got all of these groups, and yes, we do all need to come together under one single umbrella, but I think it's important for as many voices as possible to say as much as possible, and also talk to people like yourselves who have an insight into some of the other areas of industry that people might not be familiar with. So thank you so much.
Yes, I just think that finally, I think it's so unfair that all this responsibility to do something about this should fall on the likes of the people from Grenfell, who didn't ask to be put in this situation. Why should they have to fight these battles? That's what really concerns me, because we're taking on the machine here. I mean, it's the man, as they say,
yes, absolutely.
in America. And I don't know how easy it's going to be. It's going to be a real long haul.
Yes. Well, it's been likened to the Hillsborough tragedy, and a lot of people are saying it may take that long to get justice. I genuinely, sincerely hope it won't, and I'm going to do my bit to try and make sure it is a little bit quicker. And I know just about every member of the community is willing to do what it takes. But yeah, we would definitely like to keep in touch with you as things progress, and certainly if you are able to offer any more insight as things come to light, or there are any more developments in the information that comes out of Grenfell Tower, I'm sure we'll be in touch. So once again, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And I'd love to shake your hand,
but
I'll wait for you to take off the toxic materials.
You haven't washed your hand yet.
Thank you so much. Tom Woolley, Melvin Akins, Grenfell Speaks.